It's your problem, not mine. But Craig, yesterday at the end of the show, kind of an interesting comment came out from the head of the bowl season. Is that college football bowl season, or what do they call it now? Or and he basically said that they are hoping for collective bargaining, because in collective bargaining, that means that postseason games and bowl games and a lot of things can be contractually worked in and obligated to, so that good players stay for the bowl games. Now, there's a lot that goes into that I think some of it is a little bit wishful thinking on his part, but I do think that collective bargaining can help solve that problem of guys not playing in bowl games.
Yeah, I mean, this came out kind of as the show was winding down, or I guess right afterwards. Nick Carparelli, who's the executive director of bowl season, is what it's called. Had some interesting comments on what they can do to try to curb opt-outs in the future and ensure that the best players and the majority of teams' rosters are competing in these bowl games. And I know bowl games have kind of taken a little bit of a hit in terms of their popularity, and just in general, I think there's definitely a feeling that there's probably too many of them and whatnot, but they still have their place in the game. We saw the positives to it. I mean, the Pop-Tarts Bowl and all the fun that brought there for a couple of days. And obviously the big bowl games with the big ramifications are always going to be, must-see TV for most of us. So, they still have some compelling angles, but the bigger, broader swath of the entire postseason, is like anything else in college sports right now, sort of in the crosshairs of change. And tradition has managed to stick around in some cases and even return in some cases, like A&M and Texas this upcoming year. But in other ways, it is being rattled down to its core, if not outright changed. And so bowl season is one of those things you look at and you say, all right, how could this possibly change in the future? And we've seen, like, Florida State just threw up the white flag after not making the playoff and half their roster. And I'm exaggerating, but
not really,
not by much. Half their roster just said, we're dipping. We're going to go prepare for the NFL draft or whatever. We're going to protest, by not playing in this game. And so if you're, Citibank or Hooters or whatever sponsor there is for these games, you're not paying for the third string quarterback unless there's been injuries. You're not paying for the fifth string safety to be the starter unless there's been injuries. And so these opt-outs have created a bit of a dilemma for some that aren't the biggest on the food chain. And so his idea is that through collective bargaining and conversations with Charlie Baker and some of the commissioners, that eventually they're going to have those collectives when it comes to NIL get brought in-house, and the payments will be in-house. And there's those conversations have revolved around as well the signing of contracts or agreements, if you will, to basically ensure that guys will play in the postseason. And they will be rewarded for it, of course, because you're going to get rewarded for everything from participation on nowadays. But that's what they're working on, it sounds like. And it sounds like there is some possibility there. I saw Dennis Dodd. I think he was reacting to this story, but he just kind of popped off a couple of random tweets. They weren't really quote tweeting or like adding on to something. But he brought up, contracts and how all that's going to work. And I get there's a legal side to this. I just tweeted out last night, it makes too much sense of just like, hey, let's sign these guys, ensure they play in the bowl, and we move on. So, of course, there's got to be like the Debbie Downer of like, well, actually, first of all, you'd have to collectively do this, and then you'd have to do that. So there are some steps you would still have to take. But point being, all these issues, they've got to work on them now, and they're not going to have the solution right away. And this one in particular is something they need to figure out, because otherwise bowl season is going to be in a very precarious situation if you're not one of the playoff bowls. And so signing contracts, guaranteeing postseason participation, those types of things have been floated out there and are being discussed in exchange, of course, for NIL and perhaps other things as well. So, that's what they're working on right now.
I mean, there's a lot of like, things they have to, cross like on this bridge here. Like it's kind of or obstacle course, if you will. Like one of the obstacles, like in the big issue is that now that you have a 12-team playoff, when you had a 4-team playoff, it didn't affect the bowl games really at all as far as interest in the rest of them for a while. But then as more opt-outs happened, and then we hit critical mass this year with Florida State. We just did. And while Georgia did not have a ton of opt-outs, they actually happened to have a bit of a younger team. They still had a couple. But that was kind of lucky on Georgia's part because, look, had Georgia had the same kind of seniors that Florida State had, that game would have been like all backups against each other's, but they didn't. And so that, especially being a New Year's Six game and being so awful to watch, because FSU was, quiet quitting, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't even so much quiet quitting.
Yeah,
they were loudly just saying, we're protesting or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that was just their way of doing that. But how relevant, or how much interest will there be in the bowl games once the 12-team playoff, or even then a 14-team playoff exists? Like, how much do people really, really care? And when can you make those games? Like, I think I did a top 5 about it, 6-7 months ago, when the whole 12-team playoff finally got, kind of down the road, was one of the things you may have to do is, and this is a wild out there thing, is that you kind of have to add week 0 every year and make that the bowl games, because otherwise that's the only way that you could fit it into the calendar of having these two teams play each other. You essentially reward them with a game at the beginning of the next season, because if you have opt-outs and all these other things and people aren't watching on television in January or December, then might as well be better just okay, you guys can play another one next year. But again, I know that has its own problems.
Yeah, definitely.
That has its own problems. I'm just saying that right now you've got a situation where the bowls are, I'll use the word, they're at a crisis point, because if you've got people not playing in them, and they're not playing in them and opting out because they're just trying to go to the NFL, they're also trying to maybe go to the next school. So if you're at FAU and you win 7 games and go to a bowl, but you have 2 stud wide receivers and a defensive lineman that are all going to get in the portal, well, then the best players who would have been in that game who got you to 7-5 are now not going to play because they're trying to go to a better school, and they've already gotten calls from Alabama and Tennessee and schools like that. So, it's a big problem all the way around, and there's no easy solution to it, except for, I guess, collective bargaining is the straightest line. But even then, how much are you going to be able to keep some of these guys in, or what are the rules going to be? Because there's still going to be some guys that are look, I don't want to play in the Poinsettia Bowl because, I'm going to be a top 5 pick.
Yeah, and I don't know how much those bowls are affected by this as much as I think they're looking playoff-wise. And I think the playoff having more participants is going to, and I think it was even mentioned in that article, it should increase the amount of participation because Georgia's not on the outside looking in last year. If they were this year, it would be they're a part of it, and they're in a playoff game. And so Florida State, same thing. I know that's the most glaring example. They would not have probably had as many opt-outs because they would have been in the playoffs. So just in general, the playoff expands, and you're going to have more teams involved, and the eyes of the people in charge, that hopefully is what answers some of this. And I don't know how much you're concerned about some of the other bowls. I mean, I think that they're obviously on the tipping point of being on the endangered list, potentially seeing, where all this goes. How many people do care about the Poinsettia Bowl? Well, the people in the Tourism Bureau in that city, wherever bowl you want to mention, they care a lot. That matters. The sponsors care a lot. And so I think what's happening here is the sponsors are getting nervous because they pay money for, it's like the example you use, you pay for the Rolling Stones, you pay to see Mick Jagger, and you pay to see Keith Richards. You're not paying to see the backup B group of the Rolling Stones, and so that's something that money will probably solve, like everything else in college athletics. Ultimately, is the money portion of this will answer everything. But the bowls are smart to be proactive here and to be worried a little bit about what the postseason looks like in the world of an expanded playoff, because we really don't know what it's going to look like. We've never seen it before, so it's all brand new territory for everybody involved. And we may see less opt-outs because Georgia's now suddenly in the playoff, Florida State's now suddenly in the playoff. I think that would be guaranteed that a lot of those guys would have stayed in. But would there be guys who go look, I'll play in the first round, but I got to start getting ready for the draft in the second, by the time the second round rolls around? Those are the things we don't really have an idea on right now. So they're trying to figure out solutions to those potential types of problems. But again, it will likely resolve and roll back around to money. Now, the contractual part of that, again, that gets into that sticky area where we know that's not necessarily the route that schools want to go down, but I don't know how many off-ramps they have at this point. So, I think in general, the postseason is something you look at and you go, how different could this look in about 5 years because of all the changes in the playoff? And, for me, I kind of watched the biggest bowls this past season. I didn't pay probably as much attention to the lower ones. I don't think I did that really for any particular reason other than just be maybe a little bit busier this past Christmas season than I was the couple years prior. But I still enjoy watching them. I also know that if like one or two were to fall off, I don't think I'd necessarily notice or be all that upset about it. So, I feel for the bowls on one hand. On the other hand, I think like you've been kind of overly bloated anyways for a while now. Maybe this will kind of correct that as well. But that's just another, add that to the to-do list of things to try and figure out.
Yeah, I kind of think they should BCS rank like the top, 50 teams, and that basically gets you to 25 bowl games, and that's a nice round number, right? That 50 teams would be in bowls, and that's how it would be, I think that gets you through, like you got 12 teams in the playoff that leaves, like 19 other teams. Well, yeah, I probably, 12, 38, 19 other games there. So 38 other teams that can play games. Maybe that's it. Carolina, you have a quizzical look on your face.
I'm just thinking. So you were when you were talking about that, how you would take the top 50 teams or whatever. Do you think there's an appetite for, instead of bowl games, you have like an NIT with the remaining team that comes out? Like, would that draw more attention than typical bowl games?
I mean, it sounds a lot like doing the FCS playoff or the what was it, the FBS, right? Secondary play, or FCS secondary playoff, like that. No, well, modeling after the FCS, doing like the secondary FBS playoff. I think the thing with that, Garrett, is that all of a sudden you're asking like Toledo fans to possibly play another 2 games and travel around the country, and just like how much infrastructure and money and things would you have to do to set up like another tournament? Let's put it this way: any idea, if they can make money off of it, like good money, it's possible. Any idea where you're like searching for where the money comes from to answer all the questions, probably not very likely. So, I mean, it's a good idea. I just think you can also over-tournament yourself to the point where everybody's in a massive tournament, and it's just like, what in the world? And it maybe even takes away from the other, ones that you're wanting to have more people focus on. But, yeah, they do need to think about the bowl games, and they're kicking the tires on it. But, again, it rolls around to kind of the same words, NIL, contracts, those types of things. So those folks in the nice suits and the suites and the fun bowl games each year are all like the rest of us in trying to figure out what comes next and what that looks like and how you can potentially solve some of these issues before they become bigger issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. It's just like there's a clash coming. I mean, or it's here, where you've got to they've got to make, and the thing the bowl season's worried about is eventually everybody's going to pour every ounce of energy they have into promoting the 12-team playoff.
Right.
Then,
we really don't know, we don't know what bowl, I know it might just be like, who cares about the Poinsettia Bowl, but thing is we really don't know what the bowl games look like after this new playoff. Like, are people going to care as much if they're getting a 12-team playoff to kind of satiate their appetite in December and January? I don't know. Maybe everybody's still 200,000 people watch the whatever bowl on Thursday mid-morning and everything stays status quo, but we're not really in a world right now where anything's staying status quo, so I think you have to have your head on a swivel. So they're I mean, I don't want to say smart, but they're just being logical and looking at this right now and not letting it be like a tsunami that's all of a sudden on top of them, and then bowls are drowning and don't have any idea of what to do next. You got to be proactive.
Look, there are kickbacks that got to get paid in a lot of these towns.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, too, where I know a lot of people are feeling sorry necessarily for every bowl committee out there, because there is some of that to a lot of this. And so at the same time, I do know there is tourism dollars and things like that are important and that do matter. And let's not also allow the fact that a bunch of big schools in this big playoff that we're having, let's not let that take away from a Toledo making a bowl game and that being an important thing for that football program, or a Baylor next year if they were to make a bowl game. Like, man, people might not care about the Armed Forces Bowl, but for a program like that, like, they would need that. They need that. Just making a bowl game used to matter, and I'm not old man get off my lawn, but I think it still does matter for certain programs, because not everybody can go be in the playoff every year or win and compete for a national championship. So sometimes, like, just winning that Texas Bowl like Joey McGuire a couple years ago, Texas Tech needed that, man. That was a big deal for them, just to have something to celebrate and rally around and have a trophy in the case. And so there's still a place for those games, I believe. But I do think it got a little bloated and a little greedy. And so now, there are some things to figure out that you didn't have to worry about necessarily for these last several years.
Absolutely. All right.